My name is Kate Toon and I'm the head chef here at the Recipe for SEO Success. Today I'm interviewing a very well-known name in SEO circles, Mr. Barry Schwartz. Barry is the news editor of Search Engine Land and owns New York web consultancy Rusty Brick. He also runs very popular blog Search Engine Roundtable, which is known for its coverage of SEO, SEM and all things online marketing. Barry has built a great reputation for translating Google's antics and algorithm changes into understandable, easy-to-read blog posts. And he certainly has his ear to the ground when it comes to all things Google and SEO. So today I'm going to chat to him with some questions from students of my Recipe for SEO Success eCourse and the 10-day SEO challenge. Let's get started. Hi Barry, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Today we've got lots of questions that came in from the students of my Recipe for SEO Success eCourse and also on Twitter and Google. So I hope you're ready to be grilled about SEO. So,
I am ready. I'm excited.
Basically, obviously, I've talked in the intro about, the two main websites that you write for, Search Engine Land and Search Engine Roundtable. Now, your articles on Search Engine Land are like a huge source of truth for not just SEO experts, but beginners and people learning about SEO. But who are your sources of truth? Whose articles do you regularly read and enjoy?
You wouldn't want to see my RSS feed. I subscribe to, I think, tens of thousands of feeds on a daily basis. So there's not one particular thing that I look at for like truth per se. It's more about seeing what people are writing, digging into it, and seeing if there's any truth to it based on your own research. So a lot of what people do and write about when it comes to SEO is, what they've experienced. And what they have experienced might not be the same for what you might experience. So when it comes to SEO, it's not like, all right, this worked for me, so it must work for somebody else. It doesn't work that way. The algorithm is pretty confusing and pretty detailed. So, and there's a lot of competitive factors and other variables into the equation. So, obviously, it's great to reference well-written, well-thought-out articles, and there's a huge number of people who do that. I'm not going to go through a specific list, but if you do subscribe to Search Engine Land's Search Cap, you'll see some of the sites that I reference on a daily basis and pull out. But I also get news and stories from sources such as Google News, Twitter, Facebook, all the social media areas. Plus, I look and dig deep into the search forums where people are discussing things as well. So I wouldn't say there's any specific case of what's more authoritative than others, but it's more about making sure what's written is actually legit, not necessarily by the author, but by doing the research to make sure it is.
Are there any search marketing, digital marketing tools that you do recommend?
So I would definitely recommend everybody use, obviously, Google Analytics. It's one of the basic things, looking at where your traffic is coming from, even though you're not necessarily getting the keyword data is fairly important. Also, Google Search Console, it's probably the most essential tool for all webmasters to have. It not only gives you your keyword data that you really need to have these days, it also gives you all the search crawler errors, as well as, error reports. And it also gives you a lot of insight into what Google's crawling on your website by using the XML sitemaps versus what they're not crawling. Those will always give you the basic stuff that you need for you to actually handle the fundamentals when it comes to your SEO basics. Once you get more advanced, you probably want to look into link tools, maybe from Majestic or Moz or Ahrefs. And there's tons of links tools out there. They all have different pros and cons to them. Those are more about finding good quality sources to get links to your website in a natural way, hopefully, and then also ways to try to find negative links to your website so that you can hopefully disavow them and remove those from your thing. But the basic I would have to say is the Google Search Console, Google Analytics. Those would probably be the basics that you would need.
Yeah, I think you're so right. A lot of people have heard of Google Analytics and, they get onto that pretty quickly and they seem to forget Google Search Console or Google Webmasters as it used to be known. And the data that you get out of that is awesome, and it's all free. Now, my next question is going to dig into some of the algorithm updates. There's so many conflicting pieces of information out there on, what's happening with the algorithm, what the latest updates are, what works, what doesn't. Recently on your blog, you've been talking about some of the things that John Mueller has been saying, the things that don't matter anymore: keywords in the URL, reviews on local search, outbound links, title tags, or, they don't matter anymore, or they never did. But in practice, a lot of these things do seem to work, do seem to influence the results. So what are your thoughts on that in terms of the sort of conflicting views?
A lot of things that I write cover aspects of what Google's John Mueller or Gary or various Googlers are saying from the search webmaster trends team or search quality team. And it's not always the fact that what they say is what the SEO community believes to be true. Some believe some SEOs believe that Google's purposely lying to them or, sending them off in the wrong direction. Some believe that they don't really know what they're talking about. And the truth is, it might be that they do know what they're talking about, but what the SEO thinks works is not really what is actually working. I typically believe when Google says, hey, this is not a ranking factor, or this is a ranking factor, or this is a large or a small ranking factor, that they are telling the truth. So when they say keywords in the URL are a small ranking factor, and both John Mueller says that in 2016 and Matt Cutts says that back in 2012 or whatever it might be, I believe they're telling the truth. What do they define as a small ranking factor? And that's all relative. There's different weights and different variables and different competitive landscapes. So, I mean, if you want to go through each one, I definitely believe when Google's saying something, I believe them to tell the truth, unless they just say they don't want to answer, and then they're not answering. Yeah. I don't think they're misleading anybody on purpose or intentionally or at all. I just think they are trying to be as transparent as possible without giving spammers too much information. But I don't think they lie outright, if that helps.
No, I think that's right. And I think, there's a lot of confusion over causation and correlation, so things that seem to be working, but actually the factor that you think is influencing them maybe isn't the factor that's influencing them. The exact match domains issue, I see lots of businesses still, calling themselves window cleaner sydney.com.au or whatever it may be. And they do seem to do well for a little while, but again, that can just be a little bit of time while Google works out what to do with them and where to put them in relation to everybody else.
Right. And so people say this about file works because my Penguin website hasn't recovered in 6 months. I mean, they haven't run the Penguin algorithm in over a year. So it's hard to make cases saying this doesn't work, because you never know, is obviously, like you said, the lag time. How quickly does Google index? How often are they updating their algorithms? How often are they refreshing the actual weights in the algorithms, as well as the weights that you get assigned and so forth. So there's lots of different variables there. And then how much are those weighed against other things in the competitive landscape? So yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, with all this sort of information, I mean, it can be incredibly overwhelming, even for people who work in the SEO industry. If you were starting a little small business website tomorrow, what would be the main couple of things that you would focus on?
I mean, so the main thing I would focus on, and I tell this to pretty much everybody, is that if you're going to build a website, if it's content or tools or even a corporate website, make sure to have a website that Google would be embarrassed not to rank for its main keywords. So if you're, a blogger about search engines and you're not ranking well for the search-related topics or SEO-related topics, people are scratching their heads, searchers are scratching their heads, like, why is this website not ranking? That's an embarrassment for Google. And Google's going to look at that and say, hey, how can I go ahead and fix our ranking scores or algorithms to ensure that this quality website or these quality websites rank when they don't? Mm-hmm. And then they do the same thing on the negative side. So the first thing I would do is obviously make sure whatever you're doing is better or viewed better by the community that you're appealing to than any other website out there. That's easier said than done, obviously, is just read the basics about SEO. You have title tags, the content. Make sure the search engine crawl through your website, pick up the different pages, understand what each page is about in a way that is what we call search engine friendly. And you get that by just Googling SEO, going to the Google SEO guidelines and just reading through that, because they really detail the basics right there. They also have a great handbook or SEO what do they call it, Google Raters Guidelines or something like that, which they published 160 plus pages, which go through the basics of what they think are the guidelines or the highlights of what a good website is. It's not necessarily if you follow all those things will you rank number one, but it gives you an idea of what Google thinks should be a good website. And if you follow all those best practices, hopefully you'll rank very well. At the same time, even if you're not doing those things, but you have the best website out there, Google will hopefully try to adjust their algorithms to include you in their index.
I think that's something that small business owners maybe don't realize, that Google does actually tell us most of the things we need to know to do. Maybe not necessarily in a language we can understand sometimes. They're not sometimes the best at communicating what to do. That 160-page guideline, for example, isn't the most easy or enjoyable document to read while you're having a cup of tea, but it is all there. They're not hiding a lot of things, if you take the time and listen to the right people.
Right. Well, to be fair about that guidelines, they don't really want to release it. It just kept getting leaked. So they decided, what the heck, I'm going to go ahead and release it. Anybody can read it, but it's not really designed for webmasters to say, this is how I build a good website. It's really designed for people who are paid by whatever to go ahead and rate how good the search results are in Google. And if they're testing things, they use that as their guidelines.
They need a really good copywriter, just saying, just putting it out there. Now, I've got some specific questions from people in my group. There's a lot of confusion out there about PageRank. What is it, and is it still a thing?
Okay, so there's two things when it comes to PageRank, especially in the SEO world. One is obviously there's the algorithm that Larry Page is named the PageRank. It's basically the algorithms to determine what pages are considered important on the web. So if you have 10 pages about SEO copywriting and Google sees that there are lots of authoritative quality links pointing to page A versus page C, the PageRank score of page A will be higher. If everything else is equal, that page A will rank higher. It's just one of the many weights that are assigned to a web page, and it's assigned on a page-by-page level. So that's still used. Google uses PageRank. It's updated literally all the time. We don't, as webmasters, we don't see what that PageRank score is. It used to be that back in like before 2003 or so, Google used to do monthly cycle updates. And that monthly cycle update would obviously update their index monthly, meaning the pages that are included in their index. And two is a bunch of other algorithms as well, but the second most important thing was the PageRank score of those pages in their index. And people and SEOs used to go ahead and do whatever they could to increase their PageRank score by trading links, buying links, whatever it might be. And the higher that PageRank score, typically the higher you would rank in the search results. And that would be updated every 30 days. And Google also released the score of that PageRank in their toolbar, which they used to have in Internet Explorer, whatever. They used to have a toolbar called install the PageRank toolbar, which was kind of like a marketing stunt. And it became one of those things that SEOs really use as a currency in terms of trading links or buying links. If this page, I'll sell you a PageRank 7 link for X dollars and so forth. That toolbar PageRank has not been updated in over a year, at least. And Google said they're probably never going to update it again. Plus, there's very few browsers that you can find that actually support it. There's two things. One is the real PageRank is actually used and updated in real time. And it's not a 1 through 10 score, 0 through 10 score. It's actually much more complicated than that. But the toolbar PageRank, which you used to see back in the day, is no longer updated. And very few browsers support toolbar PageRank. And it's not really useful because we can't determine what the PageRank is at any given time.
The next question is around HTTPS. This is from Diane versus HTTP. For those who don't understand, that's the sort of prefix to your URL that determines whether your site is secure or not secure. And again, there was a little note from John Mueller or somebody at Google quite a while back now saying that HTTPS was part of the ranking, a small part of the ranking. And I know that lots of people made the shift from one to the other, but how important do you think it is? And do you think it's a priority for small businesses?
I wouldn't say it's a priority in terms of just core ranking. Google has a HTTPS ranking algorithm. So if you do have a site that's HTTPS, and you're competing against somebody who doesn't, and every other of the 200 or 300 or 400 ranking signals are exactly the same between page A and page B, and page A is HTTPS, page A will rank a little bit higher.
Yeah.
There is definitely a small ranking boost. In all the studies I've seen, or almost all the studies I've seen, HTTPS doesn't make a significant ranking change at all. But at the same time, Google has said, and this is a case where, again, where SEOs are saying it doesn't matter, whereas Google says it does matter, that there is a ranking boost with going HTTPS. Does that mean you should switch your website from HTTP to HTTPS? It won't hurt you. I've done it myself on several websites. I've migrated from HTTP to HTTPS, and it had zero negative impact on the rankings. It might cause issues with your ads running because you have to make sure they're set up to properly run. You have to make sure that all the embedded content and images are over HTTPS URLs. So it's a bit of a technical issue, but Google goes through all the steps you could take to make sure you do the migration properly. It could be a lot of work for people, especially if they're not a developer or webmaster themselves. There's a lot of push in not just the Google world to go HTTPS, so that's another reason to consider it. Users might appreciate if a website is completely over HTTPS. But again, I wouldn't just do it because there's a Google benefit to it in terms of ranking. I would do it if you think there's a benefit to your user.
Yeah, I mean, I think I actually asked John Mueller about it, and he kind of said, put it this way, do you ever want to access a site that's not secure? So it's kind of, especially if you're running an e-commerce store and, your e-commerce engine is already wrapped in that SSL, security, it makes sense to wrap the whole site. I moved my own site over, and as you said, it is quite complicated for the non-technical person, and I didn't notice any negative impacts. I did lose all my social shares on Facebook and Twitter, which was devastating.
There's a way to fix that. You just reference the old HTTP. In the actual share URLs, you can actually change it from HTTPS to HTTP.
Yeah, I've done that now, but there was a few days of abject panic while I was like, no, I've lost all my followers. Not that it really matters, but it was, a bit sad. Somebody asked in one of the Google communities, with your websites, there's an awful lot of bickering that goes on after you post things between different SEOs, and sometimes the comments, I don't mean to be rude here, are more entertaining than the article. Do you ever sometimes feel that you're over it, you just want to give up, and that it's too hard trying to sort of referee these arguments?
Honestly, I find it funny. At Search Engine Land, we removed comments completely several months ago. At Search Engine Roundtable, which is my own site that I control 100%, I enjoy it. I find it humorous. I know people find it frustrating to read. I'm like, so don't read the comments. You don't have to. But I find some of the comments to be funny. Some of them are outright rude. My only policy is I will only remove stuff if it's just pure spam and the people are trying to promote something. Yeah. It could be promoting, I don't know, products. It could be promoting whatever, their own agenda. I only remove stuff that is clearly, promotional or spam. But in terms of people posting their own theories, or they hate something, or they think Google's lying about something, I let it all out there. It's fine. It is entertaining. I find it entertaining, so I leave it there. And honestly, personally, I'm not a very entertaining person. So boring content at the top, and then the entertaining people at the bottom.
That's not very nice. I don't think that's true. I mean, you're almost, in some circles, seen as sort of the official translator for Google. So Google puts something out, no one really understands it. You come along, you write an article, and people go, oh, now I get it. Is that kind of a bit of a heavy responsibility, to kind of carry that weight? Or do you just ignore that?
It's my notes. It's the blog, the Search and Roundtable started as my notebook about what I think the SEO community and SEO industry, and that includes Google and all the other search engines, are talking about. It's my notebook. And I try not to interpret it too much. I'll say Google's talking about X. This is what they said. This is the quote of what they said. Mm-hmm. This is what I think it might mean, but this is what they're actually saying. There's obviously tons of people who think they know better or whatever. The truth is, I see Google saying lots of things on social, and there are times, not all the time, but there's times where it's being misinterpreted by other people as well. And I'll be like, no, Google's not saying that. Yeah. And then Google will be like, yeah, you're right. I've been covering Google for I think well over 10 years now. And I sometimes know how they're going to answer a question better than they're going to answer it themselves. Not better than Matt Cutts probably, but
Yeah.
when when you have a new Google speaker come on or whatever, I typically am a little nervous for the new Google speaker to go on stage and be harassed by the SEO community because they might not be as well versed as the old speakers in terms of how the SEO community is going to go ahead and attack them or ask them specific questions and try to trip them up. I have fun when there's a seasoned Googler like obviously Matt Cutts, John Mueller, Gary, and so forth that expect me to try to trip them up because they're pretty smart that way, and it's kind of like a game.
Yeah.
And it's fun. I don't find it to be a burden. I find it to be fun. It's just a hobby for me. I don't really make much money on this at all. It's not where I make my money, and I find it's a fun place to just keep my thoughts, keep my notes on the SEO industry, and kind of like a diary for the SEO community. It's fun.
That's a good attitude. I mean, I'm always amazed and surprised and sometimes terrified about how passionate the SEO community is and how much they argue and how much they kind of go after each other in terms of, someone puts forward a theory and everyone leaps on them and goes, no, are you surprised by how, not how, obviously it is a serious business and there's lots of money at stake, but how passionate people are about this subject matter?
Well, I think the passion comes from a few places. Obviously, they have their own theories and they don't want to be, one-upped by somebody else who has a different theory. At the same time, they also have their clients, and their clients are reading, some top industry blogs, Search Engine Land and so forth. And when they read a post there that maybe I write or somebody else writes that they don't agree with, and their client sees it, and the client saying, let's say it's about doing press releases, and their whole business strategy on getting links was about press releases.
Yeah.
And this came up big time. I had a bunch of SEOs emailing me, how could you write that? It's wrong. Doesn't say that. I'm like, Google told me they said that. This is clearly what they're saying. Press releases shouldn't be used for link building. So whatever it might be. And then you go ahead and say what their strategy is against Google's guidelines. It's not me saying it. It's what Google's saying. And I'm just transmitting the message over.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll be like, well, you have to interpret it differently. It's not about, manipulating links. It's about getting the exposure, which leads to links. I'm like, okay, whatever you want to interpret it, but this is what Google's saying. And they get very defensive, of course, because that's their livelihood. I don't blame them.
But don't shoot the messenger.
Don't shoot the messenger. And the good thing about my position is that it doesn't make a difference to me. I could write it and it doesn't impact me financially either way. And I could just give them my honest, true thoughts on what Google's trying to deliver.
Yeah.
I don't really, having 10,000 more page views in a day is not going to make me more money than having, 10,000 less visitors. It doesn't make a difference to me.
Yeah.
And so that's why I write what I write, and hopefully people like it.
All the small business owners I know want to educate themselves more, and they want to read more because they don't understand SEO, and some agencies can be quite secretive about what they're doing. So the more, my attitude has always been, the more transparent you are, the more business you'll get, and the more that you explain that things are changing, and that's okay, we'll change with them. That's a good thing. Where do you see SEO heading in the next couple of years? And again, I'm not talking for the huge, big corporate brands, but for the smaller guys, what do you think's on the cards? What big changes are ahead?
So the basics aren't going to change. You still need your basic SEO fundamentals. But the platforms are changing. So it's not just a web page anymore. It's obviously mobile now is big. Having a mobile friendly website is incredibly important. I think, in 2016, we're probably looking at more apps. We're looking at specifically, so app indexing with Google. So just Google the Google App Indexing API to learn more about that. I would also look into, if you haven't gone mobile friendly, 100%, that is 2 years ago. Also, Google's strongly pushing, as you know, Google AMP, accelerated mobile pages. That's really specifically right now for the news publishers, but there's no doubt in my mind Google's going to push it for other industries. And it's probably going to be just like Google's pushing, mobile friendliness. It's definitely being pushed more than HTTPS. So I would definitely look into that course of this year. And then in the future, it's hard to know per se. It's obviously all this voice search. So your Androids and Android Auto, people aren't really typing much on phones these days. They're doing a lot of, well, they are, but that's changing. Kids are more likely to talk to their phones. You're not going to be able to type in your car when you're driving. You're going to be talking to your car when you're driving. So it's going to be more about this voice search, and you see those answers at the top, featured snippets, Google calls them. Getting in there is important. At the same time, understanding how to monetize being in the featured snippet is a challenge for people, and hopefully that will change over time, and hopefully Google's answers, either voice answers as well as the written answers in the feature snippets, will actually change over time, and how you can monetize that also will change. So I would definitely look about, it's not just about the web page anymore. It's about content within apps. It's within content within your feature snippets, like the structured data. Google said they're going to amp that up, structured markup this year. So I would look at that as well. Just to think about how to answer the user's question when you are writing your content on your website. And if you could do that right, hopefully it will lead to traffic to your website, even in 15 years from now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so right. And I think the more conversational and question and answer based your content is, the better, if you can really deliver a great answer. Although I did read your article on the featured snippet, and whether it was a good or a bad thing, a couple of my articles have been pulled up into that spot. And, they pick the most sort of salacious best bits. And sometimes, therefore, if the question is answered and the person hasn't come through to your site, and it's like, whoa, you took my content, Google.
I feel it's a good thing. It's like, oh, wow.
Yeah, it's good for customers. Yeah, good for search.
It's good for the searcher. It makes the publisher feel like, oh, Google thinks I'm good enough for a featured snippet, and they're showing me more. But if you're not getting that click-through, then it's not good. Of course, Google says that it doesn't have a negative impact on your click-through rate. So that's a good thing. If you trust them, then great. You're getting the same click-through rate as you were getting beforehand, maybe better. It's hard to know if that's true. I haven't tested it myself. It's hard to know. Somebody can measure that. I think Google has the data, so they're able to say, hey, it doesn't, where people are saying that it has a negative impact on your click-through rate, that's not true, then that's great. Amin Singhal, who from Google, this head of search, who's retiring at the end of this month, said it's kind of like a Swiss Army knife. It's like Google's giving you these little tools that give you parts of the answer, but you always want to click through to get to the detailed tool that you need. Yeah. That's his rationale. I don't know if everybody agrees with that, but at the same time, personally, I find it, it's great. Google thinks my content's worthy of it. So it's nice to see that. At the same time, I really would like to see a case study by third parties as well as Google saying, hey, it's not impacting, or it's having a positive impact on your click-through rate. And that would make me feel a lot better.
Well, look, that's it. We're done. We've gone through all our questions. Thank you so much for your time. That was really useful. I will include links to all Barry's various websites, Twitter accounts, Facebook in the blog post. But Barry, I just want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to talk to us, and keep on fighting the good fight. I love your blog posts. They're fantastic. And I love the arguments even more.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time.